Time to check to see what's happening in business today. Joining me is Scott Phillips, the Chief Investment Officer at Motley Fool. I tell you what, how's this for a handshake? $50 million at least for Pahari, Scott.
Not bad, is it? When you leave the company, you get a 50 million big ones, mate. That'll pay some bills. That'll soothe the process from employed to not yet employed again. It's an amazing story, and this is a $50 million story of what they call carried interest. Effectively, despite AMP's massive woes for pretty much almost 2 decades now, one of the brighter parts of that business was actually the funds that Bo Pahari was running. And on the basis of his incentive plan, he actually earned that money. Now, it sticks in the core of many an AMP shareholder, I'm sure. The question, of course, is if he's legally entitled to it, if that's what the board wrote that he could have, how do you say no? How do you explain why he can't have what he's contractually obliged to get? Of course, the question remains whether $50 million should be given to anyone at all. It's a very, very large amount of money, and you wonder about the incentive contracts being written. But it looks like at this stage, at least, he's absolutely justified in claiming it based on the contract he had with the company.
All right, as for our supermarkets, there is a price war involved, involving suppliers, I should say.
Yeah, always a price war in supermarkets, or at least one not far away. This time we know that Woolies and Coles during the pandemic grew really strongly. Supermarkets don't do double-digit sales gains ever, except they both did last year. The challenge is Coles is behind Woolies in the sales race, and whenever that happens by too long a degree and for too long, the supermarkets get itchy feet. They go to the suppliers, start demanding bigger discounts, and reports this morning are that's exactly what's happening. That generally precedes a price war. So we'll see both temporary and permanent price discounts being asked from suppliers. The suppliers aren't always in a position to say no, by the way, when the big two control 85% of the grocery market here in Australia, but that'll certainly flow through to consumers and should flow through to supermarket dockets as well. Good for us, not so much great news for suppliers, unfortunately.
Well, it seems like, that some of them have just got a gun to their head so that they just have to cop it, do they? I mean, what's the other option to go to the independents?
That is exactly the problem. And Woolies and Coles, depending on the category, up to 85 or even 90% of some categories of supermarkets. I know from past experience many, many years ago, unless both retailers accepted a new product, it wouldn't be made in some instances because you just didn't have the volumes that justified producing those new products. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to suggest that anything inappropriate or illegal is happening, but in this scenario where those supermarkets control a very, very, very large share, a large majority share of those categories, when the supermarkets say jump, you've got to say how high if you're a supplier. Yeah. We know the farmers have had their issues with that on dollar milk, of course, and it applies to the big packaged goods manufacturers as well. Heinz, among others, Coke as well, were pretty vocal a couple of years ago and saying, guys, this is not okay. You're screwing us down too hard. Question remains, of course, what will be done about it, if anything? Good news for us, but not great news for those suppliers, unfortunately.
Okay, and what about Westpac, Scott? Issues refunds to customers as it gains a whopping $500 million in cryptocurrency.
Isn't that the story of 2020 and 2021, Peter? It's one of those funny cases. Look, it's amazing that almost 4 years after the Royal Commission started, Westpac is still having to provide more than $200 million in customer refunds and legal fees associated. You wonder how they're still finding these problems. NAB, of course, did the same thing a couple of months ago. I remain flabbergasted they're still finding these problems. But the good news, I suppose, is they are finding them and or compensating the customers, I suppose, for that inconvenience and that cost. So that's good. On the flip side, as you say, a little investment in Coinbase, the Bitcoin exchange that went public a week ago on the NASDAQ. They made up more than $500 million before tax and fees. They've got to pay $120 million, by the way, to the fund that put them onto that deal. So that's going to cost them a few dollars, but they still walk away with almost $300 million as profit for that. That'll well and truly cover those customer costs.
All right, Scott. Appreciate your time.